just landed in Leadership and Enlightenment, a podcast where the guests are exceptional humans that have faced their fears to crest into their best selves, growing into a way they can help their communities, creating opportunities, and sharing their secrets and their tips that they learned along the way. Without further ado, here we are, my friends. Have a great time today and enjoy Leadership and Enlightenment.
Chief, I can't believe you're on this podcast with me today. I know. I tell you, before I let you go, the audience has to know how dear you are to me. You are truly one of my mentors. The time that we spent together in the industry, at the age I was at, I always remember this conversation where you said, "You're ready for the cold bath now? You've been in the warm for so long." And you provided that learning experience for me. If I could say it anymore, and I haven't said it before, you mean so much to me, and the fact that you took that time and you worked with me and you helped me develop. And I know I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for you. So I appreciate
Very kind.
you.
Thank you. And it's interesting because one of the things I've learned and worked on, and hopefully we'll talk about the book I wrote, but, is coachability. And what I realized, coachability is not feedback. Coachability is not me telling you or you telling me. It's mutual, right? And it's got to go both ways. My point is, you coach me a lot. You know, the way you either listened or accepted it or didn't, or gave me feedback. And as you grew, you started coaching me back. So I have to say thank you to you for the same. And I think that's that, you know, what I call reciprocal alignment, that mutuality, that is why people grow and develop and become bigger, better, stronger, faster, and whatever they're going to do or want to do.
Yeah. And it's hard to see it when you're in the environment. As much as, you want to believe you understand where you're at, when you look back on this, when you really realize how all these people in your life were a part of this grand equation. And that's the title of the podcast, and Leadership Enlightenment. The fact that our title, our outfits, and the way we present ourselves isn't leadership. It's that true heart behind it and that reality. And here we are later. Harvey, you've moved into a different place in your life right now. Last time we met, you had a smile and a light shining out of you that, I tell you, it was really neat to see. Can you tell everybody a little bit about what's going on with you?
Yeah, sure. It's I've been in the industry for a little over 40 years, and most of it in the hotel business. Working my way from New York, the days with the Pierre, the Four Seasons, into Chicago. Ran a private club in Chicago, opened up the Four Seasons Chicago. And then one day I got a call, do you want to come to Vegas? And I was like, no, Vegas, I don't think so. Wasn't my thought of working there, but, came out, did the site inspection, if you will. I saw the amenities and said, hell yeah, I'm in. Yeah. So moved out to Bellagio, to Vegas. I was there, almost 19 years, and I left. And what was interesting when I left back then was I needed time off. I needed, to kind of rest and get myself back, right? And you think about this, in business, there's no off season. We don't get an off season, but in athletics, no matter what team, no matter what sport, there's always an off season where they get a chance to kind of decompress, relax, fix, heal, figure out what they want to do in the next season. So I really enjoyed when I left Bellagio before I started my next endeavor. I took about 3 months off. It wasn't planned for any particular time except to have time off. And I went back to as the CEO of an event company here in Las Vegas called Destinations by Design. And I did that for about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And like Forrest Gump, I just stopped running one day. Couldn't do it anymore.
I love that.
A lot of reasons, different podcast.
Yeah. But
I took another period of time off. And during that time, I decided to write my book. To take all my hospitality soup, all my notes that I had gathered over the years, and started, working through that. And it was a job. It was sometimes 10 hours a day of typing.
I bet.
So about to come out with that book and helping some other CEOs and some other sales teams scale and work. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
I love that. Before we jump into the book, because that's really where I want to go and your theory behind it. I mean, you and I went through an experience together in Toastmasters that I always thought was really neat, because it was a very organic situation that we both fell into. And I think it inspired us at some point in there to realize that there was a message behind it. We didn't know what to do with that message back then. You had your message. I was working on my message. But just the fact that we were able to find that security and realizing, like, you can practice in front of your peers. You can bring your life forward in front of people in a vulnerable way and learn. I think that was a benchmark for me when I realized, like, the executive leadership around me were people. like myself that were also learning and growing. Where did you get your inspiration for the industry when you first got into it? I remember your story you told me about your dad and traveling.
Yeah, that was where it came from. My dad sold insurance and did very well selling
Yeah.
it. So we went to the best conferences and incentive trips and some of the best hotels in Puerto Rico, Florida, New York. And since the age of 9, we first started going to these conferences. I'm like, I want to be in the hotel business. I love the uniforms. I love the buffet. I love walking into the lobby. 10, 11 years old, I'd be pointing things out to my parents, about the
Yeah.
lobby and how it was different than the other lobby we were in. I've always wanted to be in the hotel business. What I learned later on is, the hotel business is really, part of hospitality, and then hospitality is part of mankind in a way, right? So
Yeah.
it's just, and I think we both love being in the business because it's about people, and it's not about checking someone into a room or throwing a party. That's part of it,
Yeah.
but really it's about, people. You know, I haven't done a robot wedding yet, so I'm still working with people.
Well, so many things about, our experience together taught me how to embrace this idea of, people and the community that we're in, our teams. I remember one time, you sat me down and you said, Dean, you're the only one that knows how to do it that way. Like you have a gift and you need to figure out how to help your team learn what their gifts were. And that really set me on another path. And you always had a CEO presence. And I defined that recently in my mind. A CEO is somebody that has come to grips with themselves at some point in their life in the early years, and they're comfortable being there for their community and growing their community. I didn't happen to fit into that model when we met. I was still running and gunning, raising kids at a young age. And I just couldn't see outside of myself really until this president that we worked with said to me, go back and be dean today. And it threw me off. I didn't get it, what that meant. And I've shared it on this podcast a couple times, but you were a part of it. And so it really meant a lot to me. I used to come in every day looking for the 5 things that were going to get me fired. And I would always assume the responsibility of that danger element of those issues as a leader. I wasn't a leader. I was managing those things. It wasn't until the day I realized like my job wasn't to take in that energy of the issues. My job was to identify these 5 things and then create process and outcome that can help others grow in it. And that's when it really did set in that this was about the community and the people around us. And it relieved this tremendous weight off my heart that these were my problems and really allowed me to see myself in that role of that person that's able to bring together this energy. And we had these amazing groups that we would work all year long to get to the end. And I remember in the beginning, it was always about how we felt about it. But by the time we got down to the 4th year, 5th year, it was about how our team was feeling about it. And we could bring out some of this magic from the chef's team and all that. And that was always what I walked away with. You taught me a really great, basis for being a business person, but also being a human around others. So that led us into this point of the conversation today, where I'm going to jump right in with your book, because you have a theory of how to explain this in a way that I just think is magical. And I'm going to give you the rope. Go for it, my friend.
Cool.
Explain everyone what we're talking about.
I love, we're both writing books, so we love talking about our books, right? And
Yeah.
it's so much fun. But before we go there, I do want to just point out something, 2 things that you said. So important is, what I call superpower, right? You had to find your superpower, and then you had to bring everyone else's superpower out and of them. And it's also seed planting. Nothing happens, nothing happens automatically. Nothing happens in a moment. So it's patience. And I think in our business is lack of patience at a management or an hourly level, because we are guest facing. It has to happen now, or the guest is not
Yeah.
served or inconvenienced. So I
Yeah.
think it's that balance between understanding how there's different lanes to work in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's the fast lane where everything happens, but what has to happen to be best in the fast lane has to happen in the middle lane or the slow lane. That kind of goes back to the book. I believe there's a triad, and everything is in 3s. I've always seen things in 3s, and there's great ones, there's funny ones, there's religious ones, that we talk about in 3s. But what I realized is that there's 3 sides, and I had to figure out how to place those sides into existence, and it took me a while. But then I hit on it. Do you remember when you were a child and you would stand in front of a door frame and you'd mark your height,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd step away and you'd come back whatever period of time later, if you assumed you've grown, and you mark it again, and the difference
Yep.
between those 2 points was how much you've grown.
Mm-hmm.
And I give talks on this all the time. And just recently I was in Texas doing this, and I see you remember that everyone's raised their hand. Yeah, we do. Or, nodded their head.
Doing
This
it
one
for my
girl says,
granddaughter right now. Yeah.
Right, right. Like this one girl sitting in the front row, she says, I never did that. So I met someone who never did that. But that aside, we also stop. At some point, we either get
It's
too
true.
old, it's not cool anymore, or maybe we
Yeah.
don't grow anymore, right? So there's no need to market.
Yeah.
We reach our height. So what I kind of figured out is let's take that idea of growth and bring it around the door frame. Door frame has three sides, the left, the top, and the right. And that's the triad. So the book called Doorframe Playbook is all about you on the left side, your personal growth, your personal story, your personal marks on your doorframe. But what we have to realize is that the top of the doorframe represents our stake and shareholders, those that we have to work with or partner with, or our clients we have to do it for, whatever the relationship is.
Mm-hmm.
And that reaches outcome, the right side of the doorframe. And how the left and the top operate is how good outcome is on the right.
Yeah.
And we, it's a big nod to Las Vegas because it's 21 chapters
I love
and
that.
it's 3 sections of 7. So it's 777.
Awesome.
So I
Awesome.
kind of
Awesome.
baked a little Vegas in there.
Yeah. But it really, it brings to light this idea of input in and input out. And how does that relate to where we are and how we create our day around that? I use this term I've been putting out there a lot, mental momentum. This idea of what's going on in here is actually the outcome around us all here. And there were some specific times in my career I remember saying to people I was fabulous when they would ask me, and I wasn't. Inside, my mental momentum was in a wrong place. It was really ugly. A lot of darkness in there, a lot of secrets from others, and that starts to really fester outside of you. So it's this idea, like you said in the door frame, of realizing like that second layer up there, that could also be family in my mind. And it has a holistic
Absolutely.
view to it. That this is input in and input out. I'm going to go pick up my mother tomorrow, and she's in her 80s, and her sundowners is kind of slipping into daytime now. And it's one of those things that we have to face at our age. Like, we can't control this situation. And my right side of the door frame is play or play along. It's not, I'm going to grow into this place. There's no way that I'm going to actually, be able to change it, and I'm going to accept it. And as it gets to the top, and when her world is, there's a realization that she's not in that place that you can control, and that we have to realize like that relationship outcome through interaction is what's going to cause that third part of the door frame to either be in an environment that we're living in comfortably or a set of challenges because we just haven't accepted these places. And for me, it's a state of growth. I've been sharing a lot with my wife lately. Like, there may be a morning where she wakes up and doesn't know us, and we're not going to know what to do with that, but we can't plan into it. We're going to have to just accept the fact that in that situation, in that time, that we're going to have to put these factors and go through those motions to get to the other side of that. And I think that's where the genius in your theory of the book that you're reading, because if you give somebody, a structured system that they can start to see themselves in, then they can create a baseline that they can work themselves out of. And I think that that's really where the magic starts right there.
Yeah. And it is about structure, right? Because, and again, using this, unfortunate and sad, but life reality scenario with your mom, and my mom's going through
Yeah.
it, so I get it. We could try and just do the best we can, and we can, just figure it out as we go along. But the door frame says, no, we got to get a share in stakeholders. So it's got to be either other people who's experienced it, who can explain what sundowners is, or, we recently went to, we brought it for testing, and there's a new diagnosis out there called LANS, LANS. That's not
Yeah.
Alzheimer's. We can talk about, we'll talk about it later. I don't want to get into
Yeah,
medical
sure.
podcast.
Yeah.
But point is, by embracing others, whether it's a doctor, a friend, someone who's been through it, of course, your mother is a share stakeholder in this, right?
Yeah.
It's going to affect the outcome. And I know when I've tried to do things on my own, I knew best. Or you go back to, that business owner that wears all the hats, that trusts nobody, and we talk about this in the book. Not saying they can't get to outcome, and they, to a certain extent, always do, but it's not fast. It's not easy. And it's unnecessarily hard on them. And the people, and very few businesses are a one-person business. There's always someone else
Yeah.
in there. So by not letting that other person or people in, they're dwarfing their outcome potential. And so it really is, whether we talk about it from an interviewing process or the lanes to work in, or one of my favorites is the red wagon theory and the door
What's
frame
that?
of the red wagon. And this is pretty popular, but and someone taught me this, and I kind of took it to the door frame. But you remember pulling a red wagon when you were a child again, right?
Yeah.
You put your favorite things in it. whether it was your toys or whatever you got in the forest or, whatever, your fishing gear, whatever it might be. And at some point, again, we stop pulling our red wagon as a kid, but we end up pulling our red wagon. We go back to work and we put all our meetings and good bosses and bad bosses and experiences in this red wagon. And some
Yeah.
of us are really good about not letting too much in the red wagon or stop it to throw stuff out. But a lot of people don't unpack their red wagon. And over time, as you become, an employee, a manager, a leader, an executive leader, not only are you pulling a heavier red wagon with all that stuff in it, but you're on a slant up. You're on an incline.
Yeah,
So it gets really heavy.
sure.
So you have to learn how to thin out your red wagon. Don't take all that negativity and leave it in your red wagon. Leave room for positivity. And it
Yeah.
goes back to stopping and clearing that red wagon, whatever period of time in between jobs. Way to tell someone's pulling a bad red wagon when they come to a new person comes to work and you tell them, hey, this is how we do it. Oh, well, the other place we did it this, I think it's better.
Right. They're still
They're
packing
pulling
the
their red
wagon.
wagon
Yes,
full of
sir.
everything else. So,
Wow. That's a really cool way to see that. I also reflect back into that mirror, this ideal that, I could look back at my corporate career. I call it my 8 to 10 p.m. And I say to myself, like, there was pain I dealt with. And the question recently has come up is we tend to lean into the corporation and blame them for the pain. They caused this. But the truth is, as I look back, is I allowed that. It wasn't anything they caused. Have a unit, a system that was working that I agreed to. What I didn't do was unpack my red wagon, like you're saying. I was carrying these things with me that I was using as catalysts. And it wasn't until, being able to look back at it, like you said, and taking that time to realize, oh my, I had created this system that would instill fear in me. I would go into fight or flight, and then I was less effective than I could be. And now that I realize, like, that's not necessary. I think that there's a place in there for all of us to find your balance. And I'm talking to myself 20 years ago in this conversation. I know you are too. And that's the whole point, is that if there's anybody out there that's hiding that behind a mask, realize, like, these are two people that have been through this. And we're honestly letting you know, like, these are challenges that's the representatives' efforts to have to grow through, not necessarily the corporation you're working around.
and what you have in your red wagon will dictate how you address that. And of course, it's seed planting. You're not going to, you have to go through that. I got one question when I was on stage last week, and the person said, I have some very tough clients. They're very mean. They're very difficult. And I sometimes almost feel overwhelmed. And she was almost talking, mental health perspective.
Yeah.
And she said, how do you avoid that? And it was a great question because it's really out there, right? Especially mental health and the business that we're in, the pace that it's at. And I tried to explain, though, that you don't take that energy of that person on. We've had difficult clients. We've had terrible clients. We've had great clients, of course. But you don't take on the person that you're dealing with. In 6 months, a year, 4 months, they're gone, right? And it's over. What you take on is the desire to exceed expectations and not, and again, I find people who get overwhelmed by clients constantly tend to put the client's personality, the client's stuff into their own red wagon, their personal red wagon, and don't get rid of it when the client and the event is over.
I had to work through that in the beginning of my new adventure I've been on. In the beginning, I was just trying to replace income to show everybody that I had done something. It turns out there's nobody that ever shows up to your door and gives you an award. So anybody that's doing that, realize you're doing it for yourself. And the reality behind that is once you achieve that goal, it was elusive. There really wasn't anything there. You've established all this stuff in your own head, and you become emotionally attached to it. And once I released that emotional attachment and realized, like, this is learning. And this is like a really amazing gift that I'm given to learn in this circumstance. And that's how I always saw, my career in Las Vegas is like that. We were painting on a Picasso back then when other industries were putting two sticks together to try and make something happen. And we didn't even know it. I know that we set trends in industry that followed Bellagio because they had gone there, which means we were indirectly involved in creating this change. And yet we never saw it that way. We just saw it as the excellence of ourselves, and we grew into that. And even to this day, Harvey, I have to say, I set a business plan every year. I do a forecast with my wife on my business. I have a new mantra or mission statement because you pounded it into me for 7 years that we needed that for the team every year to aspire into. And I still use these guidelines because I believe that's what helps human nature find their best paths.
And going back to leadership, I think it's about planting those seeds, right? Leaders are farmers, right? We don't actually harvest, we let others do that, but we're about when's the best time to plant the seed? Because a lot of things that we talk about with our teams don't happen automatically. It's like you don't go out there and do this right this moment. Learn and grow into it. And that, again, I think brings up the knob over switch, right? We talk about that a lot. It
Yeah.
doesn't just happen. You have to turn
Right.
it up by the knob, turn it down, go back and
Mhm.
forth. Don't expect perfection always. Work towards it,
Yeah.
post-con it,
Yeah.
but you always have to have a knob mentality. And a lot of people have a switch. It's either right or wrong. It's yes or
Mhm.
no.
I was back then. Yeah.
Yeah,
I get
and
what you're
I've
saying.
always maintained, I don't know, I always had this saying that if we can send men and women up into space to go to the moon, we lose them, we find them, we bring them back. They're safe. I think anything we do in hospitality is relatively easy compared to that. So it's just a matter of
It sure
perspective and
is.
framework, right?
It sure is. It sure is. Well, I mean, you and I talk, we're always glasses half full. It's just the way we've been built. But was there a time in your career where you hit a low that you had to dig out of that maybe people don't know about?
Yeah, I think I'm always I'm very spiritual, so I always believe that, if there was a lull, you get through it and I will find my place and just to kind of work through that. So, I was able to always maintain a balance. I think though the hardest time in my life was after I came to Bellagio. Within
Mm.
the first 6 to 9 months, a year, it was a big operation. I went from doing events for 200 to having 200 servers at events. And
Yeah.
and everything we dealt with, you just had to add a zero or two. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
60,000, it was 600,000 or 6 million. So the scale was incredible. And at the same time, the quality and what they had produced was incredible. And I really felt at times I wasn't up to the challenge. I really felt maybe I couldn't do it.
Imposter syndrome, huh?
And yeah, and it was scary. It was a scary
Mm-hmm.
time because I'd made the move. I moved my family. I said I could, and I doubted myself. So I really had to kind of do some real soul searching
Yeah.
and go back to what I did when I was at the Pierre, and that kind of was a small episode with that. And that is what I've been, I always tell people is one step at a time, a knob. So I'd come back and I'd work on one thing and I'd come
Mm-hmm.
back and work on something else. And if I didn't hit perfection, I'd be okay. And I learned it's not about perfection. It's
Mm-hmm.
about the journey to it.
Wow.
I always said to the team, we don't want to be number one because once you're number one, everyone coming A after you and B, you get complacent.
Yeah.
We always want to be driving to be number one and working towards what number one would look like, but never take the laurels of we are number one, we're the best.
I
Think
bet
of a
you most
sports team
people,
again.
yeah, I
Like,
bet you most
they
people didn't even know you went through all that. I got to
yeah,
tell you that that part of our life we all go through, and the steps of how to get through this belief in yourself and this idea of the imposter syndrome, like, to me, that is flipping the switch and turning it off and just jumping, like you said, and taking it one step at a time, but believing in yourself that you can learn if you give yourself the time to learn. And I think that stress is created around this idea of time. And we take on opportunities, or we take on this vision of wanting the idealistic self in that role. And we compress the time of learning and not realize, like, one of the most magical things you ever said to me was, Dean, we hired you because you're great. You don't need to be great every day. You just need to be you. And that started to allow me to find my place within that. And I was able to, find perspective. And I think that happens to everybody. Because, of course, I was coming over from another property. I was an imposter. I had no idea what I was doing. I was copying BOs from the last sales manager. I didn't, it was just words on paper. But we both grew into those places where we could see past that. And I think that that's, to me, I always love telling the story about forecasting. We used to hit a number every year. And we would forecast it 18 months out. We won't go through the struggles of how Dean learned how to do this through Harvey, but Dean actually got pretty good at forecasting. He could hit $52 million 18 months out. And then the crazy accounting team would call us and ask us how we did it, which was always confusing to me. Like, why would finance not know how to do this themselves? But I've looked back at it a few times and I realized why it happened. There was a collective spirit towards this accomplishment. It wasn't because it was on the books already. That's what you had shown me how to forecast. It was about expecting what could be expected. The neatest part to me was when we would get to the third quarter and I would be looking at you like, hey man, we got that $1 million hole for your wedding still in December. When is that coming? And mind you, we only have 2 months to go. And all of a sudden you would come up with this wedding and we would fill the number. The team would have to pick up another mill around the edges for a couple months. They would get in there and bang it out. And before you know it, boom, we got there. And people say, how did you do it? I said, because we wrote it down. It wasn't for
We
any
had a
other
direction.
reason. Yeah.
We had
And
a
I think that
direction.
this is the life that we take in our own selves and leaving that opportunities to set that mark and then realize like, even though we don't have a building with walls, the community around us is still driving us into that.
Correct. And I'm sorry, you don't want to talk about your experiences becoming a better forecaster. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm happy to explain to everybody how Harvey taught me that, but it would take a whole nother podcast.
But you know what? It's funny as you were describing that. I remember when I was in New York at the Pierre, we were, and my mentor there, you know, we were looking at numbers and he wasn't as focused on numbers as he had me, but someone had brought up to his attention, we were about, you know, $1 million short, you know, to the June budget. And again, that's the end of the first half of the year. So the end of June is always an important period of time to, you know, to get your data right. And, you know, this was like maybe April and we hadn't actually heard from one wedding and he had me call him and I can't go into details, but very wealthy individual. And we weren't even sure the wedding was happening. We had a big deposit, but we didn't know what was going on. So we called him and they're like, yeah, we're doing the wedding. We were wondering when we should come in and do the details. So we brought him in and that was about a $1.3 million wedding. And I'm talking
Awesome.
back in the
That's huge.
late 80s in New
Yeah.
York. And we made our numbers. And so I always remember you got to know your business. You have to kind of have a bigger perspective. And instead of saying why you won't make it, go out and figure out how you will make it. And sure, you're going to miss sometimes, but like, to your point, most times when you write it down, you put it out there, you have a plan, you have a structure around it, and everyone's working in the same direction, you're going to get close, if not exceed what the expectation is.
Some of the proudest moments of my life, this person used a term the other day that I like now. It's called entrepreneurship. So applying yourself as an entrepreneur within your corporate role and realizing like entrepreneurship is just as important to learn. And all of these things that we look back on are literally these road marks that grew us into this place where we could just keep investing and experiencing from that place. But there's no reason, like when I was raising kids and you were raising kids, hey, I needed that stable income. That was the whole part of the thing. And yet I think that you and I instinctively were entrepreneurs. We were growing our business sense and our abilities to communicate with each other within the structure and the opportunity that we were in. We never looked at it as a catalyst or I mean, we always looked at it as a catalyst, but never as a roadblock. And, you know, I look back at some of the players that we worked with back in those days, and it was a special time. I think, you know, you cannot shake your head and say that wasn't a gift that we were given, all of us. It's been amazing talking to you. I can't wait to have you back on next year after you get your book out and published and your speaking career is moving in a strong direction. Leave the audience with one of your Harveyisms, man, that I've always taken so cherishly.
You know, I think for me, I would say I always like telling with my son when he was graduating college, and I think I've used it, but sign it, show up, and shut up. And the rest will work out, you know. And if you think from the Doorframe, sign it as you. Agree to the deal, not because it's the best deal, but because it's the right deal for you, for your share stakeholders. Show up every day, push, work, knob over switch mentality, red wagon, all that.
Yeah.
And shut up. That's the outcome. The outcome will talk for itself.
Yeah.
And you did
so
it.
True.
I did it. So many other successful people do it. So that's what I leave everyone with.
I think it's a part of genius, and there always is. Harvey, thanks for your time today. I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time to.
Always great.
Well, there we go. Another amazing example of the universe working in its magnificent way today. Appreciate you showing up, and look forward to seeing you again at Leadership and Enlightenment.